All right, so this is going to be our retro retrospective, our retro movie review topic of this evening. And then Eric actually selected this one. And please tell the folks watching or listening at home why you selected this film, which is, I'm going to tell you right now, I would highly recommend The Road to Perdition.
Well, as you can see now with the graphic on below the screen, this is our quarantine stream special. So the idea here is that we want to highlight streaming services that are free. Right now, a lot of people are stuck at home. They're isolating. They're in, and they're looking for programming. And what we wanted to do was we really wanted to highlight some of these streaming services that are free and the content that they have. So the first one that we selected, and there was some bias in this, obviously, we selected Tubi. Many of you may know that, well, if you saw the intro, you know I am associated with the film called Occupants, which is currently Tubi, which is a free streaming service. It is ad-based. And I found out that The Road of Perdition is currently in their rotation. And I thought it would be kind of fun for Dave and I to revisit this film. And that's why we're doing it. So we're trying to promote some of these free streaming services and show the content they have and give you our take on it so that you folks can enjoy it as well.
Very cool. So here, just real quickly, just a little bit of information on the film Road to Perdition. So the synopsis is a mob enforcer's son witnesses a murder, forcing him and his father to take to the road. And his father and, well, I've already blown it. We're going to go back. A mob enforcer's son witnesses a murder, forcing him and his father to take to the road, and his father down a path of redemption and revenge. So this film is stars. He looked really familiar. He looked really familiar. I didn't realize it at first, but it actually stars, and I'm going to butcher his name. I think it's Tyler Hoechlin. He's actually the CW Arrow versus Superman. Ironically enough, he actually plays Michael Sullivan, the little kid. Also in this, we have Jennifer Jason Leigh as Annie Sullivan. Yep, that's Superman. Jennifer Jason Leigh is Annie Sullivan. Of course, we have the legendary, the great Tom Hanks as Michael Sullivan, I believe, Sr. We have Paul Newman, actually, as John Rooney. We have Daniel Craig, James Bond himself, as Connor Rooney. And it's just a completely stellar cast. This is based on, obviously, the graphic novel series by Max Allan Collins, and this was directed by Sam Mendes. So as we always do with the retrospective formats, we always start off by talking about how did you first hear about the film? So tell me, Eric, how did you first hear about the film Road to Perdition?
I can't remember exactly how I first heard about it. I'm guessing it was just kind of one of those, because I wasn't looking for it or anything like that. I know that. I think it was just one of those films that it was promoted fairly well because Tom Hanks is in it, Paul Newman is in it, some big stars, and they were big stars obviously even at that time. So I think it was just one of those things where I had some friends that were aware of it. I became aware of it because of advertising and things like that. And I think that's basically what it was. Like I said, I wasn't like anticipating this film or anything like that. I just kind of saw maybe. I think it was actually a friend that initially recommended it to me, and we decided to go see it together. And it was just sort of through the grapevine. What about you, Dave?
Well, it's interesting because I think I do remember this original series, and I think it was published by Paradox Press, which was a weird sort of, I remember correctly, like a sort of an indie offshoot label that DC was trying to do. By indie, I mean sort of more independent material. So it's not connected into like a larger universe like with the DC comics or Marvel, like the 616 universe, any of that kind of thing. So I remember being somewhat familiar with this material, but I didn't actually read the graphic novels or the comics. And I just remember seeing a poster for the film, and then my wife and I, we both like Tom Hanks as an actor. And I said, well, this looks interesting. And I just remember us both going and actually seeing this at the movie theater and being thoroughly entertained. One of the things I want to highlight about this film that makes a very lasting impression is actually the score by Thomas Newman. The score is really, really great. And it was interesting. Well, we're talking about how he first heard about it. So that's how I first heard about the film. Is I just remember seeing the poster. I remember being somewhat familiar or having heard of the material before. Road to Perdition, I think one of the follow-up either graphic novel series or some kind of supplement material that actually went with the film actually had illustrations by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, which those of us who followed us on the show realize that Jose Luis Garcia Lopez is one of my heroes. I have an Atari Force page that hangs in honor actually above my my desk here. I'm a huge Garcia Lopez fan. And I remember seeing some images from that and going, oh, that's interesting. So it was mostly the poster and just the idea that Tom Hanks was in this. And it just looked awfully compelling when you think in terms of the Prohibition era and the source material. So that's how I first heard about it. Now we do have a comment here actually by Bobby Chambers. Bobby says, I didn't know this was a graphic novel. Now I have to dig for it. Yes, it was. Max Allan Collins, for those who may not be familiar, for me, Max Allan Collins was the writer of the Dick Tracy comic strip that I was reading back in the day. And Max Allan Collins is a great comic writer. He's written a lot of material over the years. Eric, do you have anything in particular you want to highlight from Max Allan Collins?
I have his book right here in my hands. So yeah, obviously it is based on a graphic novel. I believe actually that's not 100% true. I didn't have a chance to research it, but as I recall, actually it was a floppy comic originally. It wasn't just packaged like this originally. I'd have to research that, but that's what my memory tells me. Even though they decided to say it's based on a graphic novel, it was actually like parts. That's how I remember it. But this is what I have. I actually do have the graphic novel version of it. And I do actually have it signed by Max Allan Collins, which is really awesome. Cool. So I had a bit of an obsession with him when this movie came out, and I got to meet him at San Diego Comic-Con the year that the movie came out because I was so into the movie. I sought him out. I found out that Max Allan Collins was there that year and that he was doing panels, and I went straight to his panel. And I think I bought the book on the floor. I think that's where I found the book, is I was able to buy the book on the floor of San Diego Comic-Con, and I brought it right to him. He signed it for me. We had a really nice conversation and everything like that. And I just thought it was so cool because at that time, I was like self-publishing my own books, and I always had these dreams of adapting my books into movies and television shows. And I was like, this is the guy who's doing it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I was really kind of mesmerized by him. And I remember his presentation. And one of the really funny things about this is, I think he's the only person that's ever done this. So he wrote the graphic novel, comic book, however it first came out. They made a movie of it. He didn't get to write the screenplay, but they brought him back to do the novelization of the film, which I think is a very unique thing. I don't think there's anybody else that's been in a situation like that, where basically he made the source material, was basically not really involved with the movie, except maybe like as a consultant, and obviously he was paid royalties and things like that. But then on the back end, they gave him the novelization, which I can't remember if I ever read that. And it would be kind of interesting to see that, because it goes from his original vision to the film vision, and then he has to kind of reconcile that into his version of the novelization. And he talked about that on his panel, what a unique situation that is, because the panel he was on was all people who had their books made into films, television. That was the point of the panel. And he had this unique thing where it's like, yeah, not only did I do that, I wrote the novelization of my own, of the film, that my work was based on. So I always thought that was really unique. And that was one of the other things that I think made me really into him. It was like, wow, that's a really cool story. That's pretty interesting.
No, yeah, that is really cool. Then we have a couple more comments here. Looks like James is saying we should have a new segment, Confessions of a Stalker.
There you go. All those times that actually we could probably get the Rogues Gallery to give us some good stuff with that too. All those different fan moments and all those different geeking out moments. Although I will say, with my interaction with Max Allan Collins was very casual. I just went up to him after the panel, talked to him, and had him sign my book, and he just started talking to me. He's a nice guy. You know what I mean? A lot of authors are kind of like one way or the other. They're either like really casual and they're just like another guy and they're just going to talk to another guy, or they're just complete asshole prima donnas. There's like no in between, it seems to me, with authors. They're either like real kind of humble, normal guys, or they're just, full of themselves. And I can say from my experience, Max Allan Collins was very nice. And it wasn't like a crowd of people went up to him either. It was just like me and maybe one other person. And he was happy to talk to us, So, and I have lots of bad celebrity stories, lots of them from my time when I was a staff member of the Phoenix Comic-Con, and I used to beg people to come to our show when nobody knew about it. Now that's one of the biggest shows in the country. But back in the day, nobody knew about it, and I had people treat me like dirt. So I've got plenty of those bad celebrity stories as well, but I don't tell them because I'm not like that.
Cool. So obviously we talked about how we first heard about Road to Perdition. So in order to make this a proper retrospective, we have to talk about how we feel about the film today, having just recently rewatched it and revisited it. So tell me, Eric, how do you feel about the Road to Perdition today?
It's really interesting because, I remember the film fairly well. I haven't watched it in a very long time, but I do remember it. But there were things that I had forgotten, in the interim since the last time I saw it. And one of the things I had forgotten was how shocking the murder of Tom Hanks's wife and other son, like how shocking that really is. And
it is shocking.
And the way that it's done is actually really tasteful, for lack of a better term. It's shot really well, and it's not gratuitous really in any way, but it really makes you feel it. At least for me, it does. And it's also funny because I know when this movie came out, I didn't have any children, and I have children now. And so it kind of gives you a different perspective for me in that regard as well, putting myself into the shoes of Tom Hanks' character. And they have to do, one of the things that's so beautiful about this film is it's a real film. And they tell the story through images much more than they do through dialogue. So it has to do with expressions. So like Tom Hanks and Paul Newman's acting is just like superb. It's like top notch because there's not a lot of exposition. There's not a lot of explaining. They tell the story through the images, which I think has to do with the source material being a graphic novel. You can kind of feel the comic book influence, and it makes the film so much better. And it tells the story in a way that's just, you just really feel it. And they don't have to do a lot of dialogue or exposition, and you feel it. And like for me, that scene, I really felt it because, as a father, you think of a situation like that. Well, one of your children has been brutally murdered, and part of you probably wants to die with them. But at the same time, you've got another child that's still alive. And what are you supposed to do in that situation? So it's a huge kind of moral conundrum, you know what I mean? And it's really interesting. And I thought Tom Hanks did a good job with that because Tom Hanks plays obviously a hitman in this movie. And he's obviously a very complicated individual. Let's put it that way. He's a very complicated individual. And on the one hand, he's this tough, emotionless hitman who doesn't hesitate to take somebody out if he feels he needs to. But on the other hand, you have this situation where now, his family members have been murdered, and Tom Hanks has this great reaction where he's sobbing, you know what I mean? And he's so affected by what has happened. It just provides such a depth to the character. It really just provides such a depth to the character. It's interesting going back and watching it now. Like I said, as a person, as a father, and the fact that when I watched it before, I wasn't, and watching some of those scenes, because they really hit me, and they really hit me. And then the whole dynamic of this man running around basically on a vendetta at the same time while he has to protect his son. And then and beyond that, he has to enlist his son to help him, which I think is also really kind of an interesting part of the story, is that his son can't be passive in this. His son has to help him in order for him to achieve what he needs to achieve.
Well, what's interesting about this film, revisiting it, that I don't remember, I think, being quite as aware of, is the connections, and I don't know if Maximilian Collins talked about this, but there's an interesting connection, because this film, to me, in terms of the story concept anyway, feels a little bit influenced by Lone Wolf and Cub. Eric, are you familiar with Lone Wolf and Cub?
I am familiar with it, yes, but I have not read it. I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it.
So in Lone Wolf and Cub, it's a classic. There was a series of films, and in addition to the series of films, there was actually a really great, manga series that came out years ago. And the basic tenet of it is that there's basically an executioner who's in service to a lord. His entire clan that he serves, as well as his master, is basically executed, and then he is supposed to kill himself, but instead he decides to go out for revenge and basically pay back the people that basically took from him essentially his life, and he has to take with him his young child. So watching Road to Perdition, I couldn't help but to draw connections to not only Lone Wolf and Cub, but recently we had reviewed and discussed The Mandalorian. And I thought it was really interesting that there's this interesting through line with some of these kind of stories. So having revisited Road to Perdition, this is an incredibly well-crafted film. If you haven't seen it in a little while, I highly recommend revisiting it. I do own this actually on DVD. It's been a few years since I've watched it. And actually rewatching it, I was mesmerized and taken aback by how wonderfully crafted and shot this film is. I totally agree with Eric. It's told more through the visuals than dialogue, but it's so beautifully and wonderfully staged. The acting is top notch. The score, as I said, from Thomas Newman is just haunting and beautiful and very emotional. The direction from Sam Mendes is absolutely top notch. I had forgotten that Daniel Craig was actually in this, and was kind of shocked to see him.
Very different kind of role. Very different kind of role.
Oh yeah,
you can see what an amazing actor he is as well. Because I mean, he's almost, other than his appearance, he's like unidentifiable. I mean, that character is like that's not James Bond, that's for sure.
That's for sure. And I was also amazed too, because of course I know this takes place during Prohibition, and I remember there being a connection to, Capone and the Chicago mob and everything. But it's just the whole thing is so well told and so well crafted. Jude Law is also in this film as well. I didn't mention Jude Law earlier. Gosh, it's just such a wonderfully put together film.
And Jude Law is amazing in this too.
Yeah,
he doesn't have that sort of pretty boy kind of thing at all that he normally has in so many of his other roles. That sort of dashing leading man kind of thing. No, that's not Jude Law in this movie at all. Very, very psychotic, crazy character, and he does a very good job bringing that character to life. I'll also say this is probably one of the most beautiful, this movie has probably one of the most beautiful murder scenes you will ever see.
Yeah.
I mean, they actually cut all of the audio except for the score, and it's completely silent except for the score. And the cinematography is beautiful. It's like the most beautiful massacre you will ever see on film.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing how well it's done. And again, the story is actually pretty much told through Paul Newman's face, because there is no dialogue. It goes completely silent, and all you can hear is the music as this massacre happens. It's a massacre, and yeah, I get chills. I remember seeing it in the theater. You know, if there's any way you could see this on the big screen, it's definitely worth seeing on the big screen too, because it's haunting, and it like I said, it's like the most beautiful murder ever put on film. It's crazy. It's crazy.
No, yeah, and I seriously, I mean, if you haven't watched this film in a little while, like Eric was saying, it's in rotation on Tubi. Definitely check this out. I cannot recommend this film enough. It is just so well acted. It is so well shot. It is so well staged. The art direction is top notch. It's fun because it's a period piece set during the time of Capone with the Chicago mob. Just everything, the score, just everything about the story. Like this is cinema. In my mind, at its kind of its highest form, and it's just so well done. And then to know also too, for those of us that are into it, to know that this is inspired and comes from our comic book series as well. It's just another, and it's interesting too, because you wouldn't think of this as coming from a comic book series. And that's the thing that's really great about this too. It shows how much really wonderful source material there is that can be adapted and introduced to a new audience in the hopes that they'll backtrack and find the original graphic novels or find the original comic book, stories, and delve into that world and see where it's similar and see where it's different, and just kind of get lost in this just really interesting world and what's happening with the story. I can't recommend this movie enough. Would you agree, Eric, that you would recommend that people should check out Road to Perdition on Tubi?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. A big recommendation. Josh mentions, by the way, that it did win the Oscar for cinematography, and I think I do remember that it did win an Oscar, well-deserved Oscar for cinematography, because the cinematography in this film is amazing. It's excellent. It's one of the best shot films I think I've ever seen. I would actually compare it to The Joker in terms of cinematography and just the use of imagery in telling the story. And again, it also kind of shows the source material. Being that it was a graphic novel, you can kind of feel that there. Bobby brings up an interesting point in terms of the narrative of the film. He said it's hard not to wonder if what happened to Michael Sullivan was just karma. And I will say that that's kind of, I think, the message of the movie. It's unlike Picard, which the message is that being human is to die, and dying makes you human. This movie is all about the idea of killing. And it's also about the idea of whether it's not really a story of redemption. It's a story of these violent men, the lives they lead, and sort of that life by the sword, live by the sword, die by the sword, because that's basically what happens to these characters. But then the story is really about the boy, you know what I mean, and the son. And how does he fit into all of this? There's a very interesting undertone in this movie that basically Tom Hanks' character kind of resents his son in a way because he feels he's too much like himself. And that's a profound thing because he's a hitman. And he does not want his son to be like him, but he sees a lot of his son in him. And that's really what the core of the movie is about. I won't give away that ending in case someone hasn't seen it. But that's really what it's about, is that it's about that relationship that is his son going to be like him or not? And there's this beautiful exchange between Paul Newman's character and Tom Hanks' character, where I love it, where they have this exchange after everything's gone to hell. They have this exchange, this moment together, and Paul Newman's character tells him there's only one thing basically for certain, that there's nobody in this room going to heaven. They know what they are. They know who they are. They know they're bad people, including Tom Hanks. Okay, and it's kind of interesting seeing Tom Hanks in a role like this because he's like the nicest hitman you'll ever meet, but he's still a hitman. Right. He's still a violent man. And I love that line because there's a lot of morality in this. And I will mention there's some big differences between the graphic novel and the movie. And one of the most striking differences is that in the graphic novel, we get to see the son grown up. And a story that Max Allan Collins relayed about that was that originally the grown-up version of the son was going to be played by Jack Lemmon. And Jack Lemmon actually had already died by the time this movie came out. And as far as I know, this was the last movie that Paul Newman made. So you can kind of imagine the emotional impact if Jack Lemmon had also appeared at the end of the story. So if you are interested in the graphic novel, I will tell you it's very different. A lot of the core elements are there. For instance, Paul Newman's character is sort of like a father figure, and he almost comes across as sympathetic. That character in the graphic novel is not sympathetic at all. He's just he's just a heartless, kind of Godfather type, but he's not sympathetic. So that there are some very different directions they took from the core material. And I remember Max Allan Collins talking about that and being okay with it. Some writers, they get really upset when there's any kind of change in their source material, but he liked it. He said he loved the film. I remember him saying that he was gonna keep beating that dead horse, as long as he possibly could, because he was pretty excited about it. But it is very different. I will tell you that if the graphic novel is very different from the film in a lot of ways.
And for me, sometimes that's the thing that makes taking the time to actually find the original source material and read it, that makes it entertaining and enjoyable, is the differences between the two. I often talk about how much I love the Gold Key Star Trek comics, the original ones, because those comic books are so wildly inaccurate and so different actually from the series, because the artists and the writers working on it, all they had was some stills and some synopses. Sometimes they hadn't even actually had the chance to actually see any of the episodes yet. And you see essentially Spock, like what looks like he's in essentially like a World War II era submarine, and the landing party's got canteens as a part of their regular gear when they go on away missions. Is it accurate to Trek? No, but it's wildly entertaining and it's fun. And in a weird way, it's like you can take something that you enjoyed or something you like and experience it in a new way, yet you're still in that same world. I sometimes don't look at things and go, as long as it's well done, I don't mind if they make minor changes or they change things. It's just
that's basically what Max was saying about this, because I've seen authors go completely the opposite way, where they're just like, oh, they butchered my vision and blah blah blah. You know what I mean? But then again, I think a lot of especially a lot of people who write novels, they don't understand television or film at all. I really think that. I think we saw that with when we were talking about The City on the Edge of Forever and the original idea. It's just like you get this sense, yeah, this guy's a good writer. I mean, he writes good stories, but this is not going to work on television at all. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not going to work. So sometimes they just don't have that sensibility. Now Micah has a comment, and she said, even though he really is the protagonist in this film, can you think of any other movie that Hanks played this much of a bad guy? And no, I can't think of any other movie where he played anywhere near a bad guy. He's kind of always like that everyman, you know what I mean? That, Jimmy Stewart type, as they say, Yeah, I can't think of another film where he played any kind of a character like that.
True. And then if you notice, Bobby Chambers echoes the same thing over here in the Rogues Gallery. He says, not a single one comes to mind. Good point. And I'd have to say, I totally agree. I can't think of another film where Tom Hanks played this much of a bad guy. But it's interesting about this role in this film is it adds to the amazing legacy of Tom Hanks too, because it is such a departure for him to play this kind of role. So yeah, it's really, it's interesting because I was watching this film and thinking about the kind of great performances that he turned in when you look at, you know, Captain Phillips, for example, or you think about Big, or I mean, it's just such an amazing film legacy too. But it is fun to see him in such a different role. But it's,
Although I would say, as I said before, he's like the most sympathetic hitman like ever. You know what I mean? So
right.
he still has that Tom Hanks thing, which works in the film. It kind of helps the film because, yeah, he really is a very bad person, quite frankly. But you know, like I like to say that, you know, serial killers are still nice to their moms, because a lot of them are. You know, people forget that. They think that because someone is a murderous person or whatever, that they're all bad, quote unquote. Well, that's not always the case. They still might have friends and all that kind of stuff. And in this case, he has a family and he loves his family, but he is also a murderer. He is paid money to kill people. That's what he does.
Right. Yeah, no, but yeah, like I said, I definitely recommend people check this out on Tubi. Again, we're recommending Tubi primarily because it is a free service. It is ad-based. It won't cost you anything to actually watch Road to Perdition. So it's a part of our, what were you calling it again, Eric? Our quarantine special?
Quarantine stream.
Yeah,
quarantine stream special.
Yeah. So we're not being paid by Tubi to recommend this. We're only recommending it only from the standpoint of it's a way that you can watch a great film, and it's not going to cost you anything extra. And we want to, you know, kind of highlight those fun ways that people can find fun and enjoyable entertainment. So, and then Mike actually calls
entertainment. That's the key right now.
I was going to say, Micah over here in the gallery also calls out Philadelphia, and then she says, not that he played a bad guy, but just echoing another one of the great roles that he has played. Yeah,
that is a great film as well.
Powerful, powerhouse.
That's a great film as well.
Yeah, awesome. Okay,
and then I do want to say, hold on 1 second. I do want to say, as far as Tubi, I primarily stream on my PlayStation 4, and this stream went much smoother than CBS All Access or Disney Plus. I have issues with Disney Plus, all sorts of issues with Disney Plus on the PS4, and I've had some problems with CBS All Access. Tubi worked just fine.
Yeah, and I've mentioned before I've been having issues with CBS All Access just on my Samsung television, and when I tried to report it, I got a weird bounce back, and then when I tried to use their stupid email submission, that didn't work either. So there you go.
And by the way, unlike, you know, because they're saying Picard is free now, well, you still have to give your credit card. You don't have to do that with Tubi. I just want to point that out.
Well, there you go. And then my mom actually mentions, looks like over here in the Rogues Gallery, she says that Xfinity On Demand offers it through Tubi.
Oh, that's cool.
Something else fun there that you can check on Tubi. Check it out. So very cool.